Hey guys, tonight we step gently into the misty highlands of ancient Oaxaca, where the sky glows faintly pink at the edges, and the air smells faintly of stone and wild marigold. You're perched above a quiet valley, wrapped in a woven shawl of sleepiness, walking slowly toward an age where calendars weren't printed. They were carved into the earth itself. It's the kind of place where every sunrise mattered more than your alarm clock ever could, and if you forgot the date, well, you might end up planting your corn a month late or accidentally scheduling a war. The Zapotecs, the calm, calculating architects of this forgotten world, built an entire civilization around measuring time, and did it so well that modern astronomers still raise their eyebrows in admiration. Their calendar wasn't a calendar like the one hanging crookedly on your fridge. It was a living thing bound to the movements of the stars and the patterns of their gods' moods. And somehow, they kept it all organized without spreadsheets. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing the sleepy global map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through cool pre-dawn fog feet, brushing across ancient stone terraces. Below you lies the valley of Oaxaca, still dark, still dreaming. But at the edge of the hills, one rocky platform begins to stir. It's carved from limestone, laced with moss, and perfectly aligned with the rising sun. You step into the center and feel that subtle pull of geometry and intention. This isn't just a slab of stone. It's a sun catcher, a timekeeper, a mathematical altar disguised as a patio. The Zapotecs were builders, sure, but they were also watchers. Obsessed watchers. The kind who noticed that the shadows from their doorposts changed slightly every day and decided that meant something. So they began carving markers into the ground. Notches, grooves, holes, places where the sunbeam would land if it was precisely the right day. Imagine setting your iPhone alarm with a chisel and a century of trial and error. They had help, of course, not from clocks, but from the stars. Venus, in particular, was their darling. They noticed how it vanished, reappeared, and danced through the sky with mystifying consistency. So, they built observatories, though that word sounds far too modern. These were really angled walkways, narrow corridors between stone slabs designed to catch celestial events, like you'd catch rain in a cup. You couldn't see the stars from everywhere, only from just the right angle, which meant you had to build your whole city around the stars. No pressure. Historians still argue whether these alignments were purely symbolic or functioned as rigorous astronomical tools. But the shadows don't lie. On the equinox, the sun rises right down a specific corridor. On the solstice, it hits a different notch. And if you're a sleepy priest, it's the sky tapping you on the shoulder saying, "Hey, it's planting season. Get moving." There's something oddly satisfying about how exact everything is. You wander past a low wall covered in petroglyphs, glyphs shaped like faces spirals and occasional jaguars, and realize it's less of an art gallery and more of a to-do list from 600 BCE. The face with the wide eyes, that means the sun passed a certain point in the heavens. The spiral, that's a calendar reset. The jaguar, well, probably a reminder to respect whatever jungle god you accidentally annoyed last week. One stone stele catches your attention. It's cracked, tilted, and lightly covered in lichen, but still clearly carved with the number 13. Or maybe it's a name. Or maybe it's both. You're learning that Zapotec time isn't just a number. It's a mood, a symbol, and sometimes a warning. Oh, and speaking of numbers, they counted differently than we do. Their base wasn't 10, it was 20. Because fingers and toes. So where we might just say, it's the 14th, they'd say something like, it's 14 out of a cycle of 20 nested inside a layer of 13, which rotates through a cosmic spiral of 52. Simple stuff. And yet somehow it all worked. Every stone, every glyph, every weird little notch on the stairwell, it all helped them track time more elegantly than most of us manage with synced calendars and digital alerts. You can almost picture a Zapotec farmer standing exactly here thousands of years ago, squinting into the morning sun and nodding once before grabbing a handful of seeds. Right on schedule. Fringe theorists like to whisper that the calendar stones were part of a much larger planetary system that the Zapotecs and their Mesoamerican cousins were mapping not just seasons, but deep cosmic cycles. There's not a ton of proof, but it's fun to imagine a quiet man in a cotton tunic glancing at Venus and muttering, "Yup, Mercury's about to retrograde a few millennia ahead of the horoscope crowd." You sit on the edge of the platform, your feet dangling over history. The fog begins to lift. The sun finally peaks over the eastern ridge and lands directly on a carved groove beside you. The stone glows faintly. For a moment, you swear it hums. You didn't set the time. The hill did. You stay there for a while, legs swinging above time itself, and let the sunlight creep along the grooves like syrup. It moves slowly, deliberately across the surface of Monte Alban, the great stony seat of the Zapotecs. You rise and your footsteps echo as you walk along its central plaza. The air is thinner up here, not just from altitude, but from expectation. This is not an ordinary hill. It's a calendar disguised as a city. Monte Alban wasn't just built on a mountain. It is. The mountain shaved and shaped into tidy tiers, plazas, temples, and platforms. You don't just stumble upon a place like this. The Zapotecs chose this summit, flattened it by hand, and then built a sacred time machine on top of it. A city that watches the stars. It's like someone saw a sundial and thought, let's make it a skyscraper. Here time isn't measured with sand or ticking. It's measured with shadows falling exactly where they should on staircases, across ball courts, along temples that face the exact sunrise on the exact right day. You pass one building where on the solstice light enters a narrow corridor for only a few moments before vanishing again for the rest of the year. A celestial game of hide and seek. You begin to notice that the layout of Monte Alban is a little askew. It's not aligned perfectly north-south like you might expect. It's tilted, deliberately. Historians still argue whether this angle is astronomical lining up with specific stars or Venus, or if it was more symbolic, pointing towards sacred places beyond the horizon. Either way, you get the feeling they didn't eyeball it. The Zapotecs weren't the kind of people who just said, yeah, close enough. You duck into what's left of an observatory, a building with narrow slits in the stone. Stand in the right place at the right time of year, and you'll see the sun slide perfectly through. Not every day, just that day. Maybe the equinox, maybe a Venus rise. Either way, you don't get many do-overs. You get one shot to get it right, and they did. But the hill isn't all science. There's ceremony here too. You pass through a sunken plaza where priests once stood, arms raised, feathers shivering in the wind, announcing the new cycle. A new month, a new name, and possibly Depending on how the stars aligned a new sacrifice. You shift uncomfortably. The stones remember things. Some of them feel a little too smooth. Like maybe they were worn down by something or someone kneeling for a very long time. Still, it's hard not to admire the commitment. They didn't just use time, they curated on it, like one of those people who color code their closet and meal prep a week ahead. Except instead of deciding which quinoa to buy, they were deciding when to start wars, when to crown rulers, and when the gods were likely to pick up their celestial phones. You know, normal stuff. You turn a corner and come to one of the most enigmatic features of Monte Alban Building J. It's shaped like an arrowhead rotated strangely and covered in carvings that scholars still squint at with confusion. Some think it points to important celestial events. Others think it's a kind of victory board, each glyph marking a conquered village. One fringe theory suggests it might have been a broadcast hub for communicating with alien traders, but let's not lose too much sleep over that one. What's certain is that it doesn't quite fit. It's slightly rotated from everything else. As if someone said, we need this one to point over there. It's disorienting, which you suspect was part of the point. Zapotec architecture didn't just reflect order, it reflected intention. Whether you were meant to feel awe, confusion, reverence, or the urge to check the sky that was all by design, and there's more. From this height, you can see the full layout of the city. It looks almost gridded. Not like Manhattan exactly, less coffee shops, but impressively ordered for something over 2,000 years old. The plazas, temples, and housing blocks form patterns. You suspect if you had a drone and an archaeology degree, you'd find it all forms one enormous ritual diagram. Maybe it already does. Historians still debate whether Monte Alban was modeled on a giant calendar wheel or a mythological map, or both. You look toward the horizon and think of all the people who once stood here watching for Venus to rise. The Zapotecs believed Venus was a warrior. Its first morning appearance, after disappearing for days, wasn't just a nice sunrise, it was a signal. Sometimes of peace, sometimes of war, sometimes of a need to clean your ritual tools and get your affairs in order. Venus did not do gentle reminders. It was more of a cosmic shout. You sit on a wide staircase, warm stone at your back, and listen to the wind. It's quiet here now. But once this hill pulsed with the sound of flutes, the clang of copper bells, and the rhythmic stamp of sandals. Children ran along the terraces. Priests counted days with obsidian knives. And someone somewhere always knew the date, not because they had to, but because the gods expected them to. You descend a slope at the edge of Monte Alban, stepping from sacred stone into the murmur of memory, and everything feels like it's ticking. Not loudly, just the faint, rhythmic sensation of time unfolding underneath your feet. That's how it worked here. The Zapotecs didn't just build monuments, they built moments. Repeating, rotating, exquisitely synchronized moments. You make your way toward a plaza where two invisible gears seem to grind softly beneath the soil. These gears are not mechanical, they're calendrical. The Zapotecs, like their Mesoamerican neighbors, didn't rely on a single way of keeping time. They used two completely different cycles, running at the same time, always overlapping, always whispering to each other. The first is the Otun 60-day sacred calendar, often called the Tonalpohualli in Nahuatl. But the Zapotecs had their own term for it, likely something close to Paye. It was deeply mystical, used for divinations, naming ceremonies, and figuring out if a baby would grow up to be a farmer, a flute player, or someone who should probably avoid open flames. Each day in this cycle had a unique name, made by combining a number 1 through 13 with one of 20 day signs. So you might be born on 7 water, or 2 rabbit, or 13 death, which would make for awkward birthday cards. Then there was the 365-day solar calendar, used to track the agricultural year sunrises, harvests, planting times. This was the practical one. The one that said, hey, you should probably get your maize in the ground before the rainy season forgets to show up. The magic, though, was in how these two calendars interacted. Like twin gears with mismatched teeth, they meshed together in a long, elegant rotation. Every 52 years, the same day name would reappear in the same position. That 52-year span was called a calendar round, and it was a big deal. You didn't just throw a cake in the oven. You rebuilt your hearth fire, renewed your temples, and maybe, depending on the omens, sacrificed something moderately important. Historians still argue whether the Zapotec calendar round had the same ritual fire ceremonies as the Aztecs, but the idea of that 52-year reset seems to have rippled across Mesoamerica like an astrological echo. It was the reset button for the universe, or at least a polite cosmic nudge that said, hey, maybe clean your spiritual kitchen. You imagine how dizzying it must have been to live inside 2 calendars. Every day had 2 meanings, one sacred, one solar. You'd wake up and think it's 6 read on the 4th day of its alkalisli, which is less a date and more a cryptic poem. Time wasn't a line, it was a braid, and every strand had purpose. What's strangely comforting is how much of this complexity was grounded in rhythm. It wasn't chaotic, it was ordered, frighteningly so. You sit beside a carved stone showing rows of dots and bars, the Zapotec counting system. A dot is 1, a bar is 5. Simple, beautiful, modular. You start to feel the numerical beat of time like a distant drum. Each dot and bar combination representing a day, a cycle, a destiny. That's the thing. The sacred calendar wasn't just a scheduler, it was a cosmic mood ring. Certain days were lucky, some were dangerous, some were reserved for ceremonies, some for silence. If you were planning a wedding or a battle, or even a haircut, you'd better check with the calendar priest first. You pass a low stone altar, cracked, but still whole, and wonder how many day names it once bore. Maybe it marked the beginning of a new cycle, or maybe it was just there to help the local priests stay on track. Because let's be honest, even ancient high priests probably forgot the date once in a while. Wait, is it 9? Lizard or 10 lizard? Ugh, we sacrificed the goat on the wrong day again? What fascinates you most is that no one day was ever repeated exactly the same way for 52 years. You wouldn't live to see your birthday combo come around again unless you were very lucky or very old. That made each day matter. You wouldn't waste a 4 Jaguar day scrolling through Obsidian TikTok. You'd honor it, fear it, or at least remember it. The fringe crowd likes to speculate that the 260-day count came from something biological, maybe the average human gestation period, or that it was connected to Venus cycles, or the number of visible bones in the human body. Historians haven't settled on a reason, but they agree on this: it was deliberate. The Zapotecs didn't just guess 260, they chose it. And then they stuck to it like it was divine Wi-Fi. You find yourself tracing invisible gears with your finger in the dust. One big loop of 365, one smaller loop of 260. When you line them up and count forward, they only sync again after 18,980 days. That's 52 years. And you suddenly get it. The thrill, the chill, the echo of time colliding with itself. Somewhere in the ruins, you think you hear a bell chime. Maybe it's in your head. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the sound of two calendars clicking into alignment for the 364 125th time. You smile. Today is someday. Maybe 11 wind. Maybe 2 crocodile. You're not entirely sure, but the calendar is. You're walking now, slowly, almost ceremonially, along a narrow causeway lined with glyphs. They're not towering inscriptions or grand declarations. No, these are quiet little etchings, patient spirals, animals with too many toes, faces that don't quite smile. They mark the passage of time, not with fanfare, but with repetition. Which brings us quite sleepily to one of the strangest things about Zapotec time it loops. Every 52 years, the two primary calendars, the sacred 260-day and the solar 365-day, complete a full cycle together and start anew. You'd think a civilization with gods and maze and obsidian knives might be too busy for such mathematical patience. But no. This was their rhythm. And when those two cycles realigned, it was called the poetic calendar round. Again, always again, you take a seat on a flat sun-warmed stone, and you imagine it the final day of the 52-year round. The priests climbing to the hilltops, the people lighting fires, or more dramatically extinguishing them all, total darkness. This was, according to some traditions, the binding of the years, a moment suspended between destruction and renewal. Historians still debate how widespread this fire ceremony was among the Zapotecs themselves, or if it was more dominant in Aztec practice, but the sense of drama certainly wasn't lacking. In theory, the world could end every 52 years. That was the anxiety. If the sun didn't rise the next day, that was it. Cosmic curtains. Thanks for playing. And yet the sun always rose. And when it did, they rekindled the fire, celebrated, and started again. You too breathe out. The anxiety is oddly soothing, knowing that even a civilization with calendar anxiety still trusted the dawn. This cycle had another purpose. It was essentially your civilization's version of saving and rebooting the hard drive. A fresh calendar, a reset of the celestial order. You got new omens, new alignments, and possibly new names. And all of it, every ceremony, every song, every spark, was meant to convince the universe to keep turning. You stand again and notice something curious. A large platform shaped like a stepped square. On its side, carved discreetly, are a series of repetitive glyphs. At first glance, they all look the same. But if you squint, they begin to shift numbers. Climbing signs repeating at long intervals as if someone was counting days, not in dozens, but in lifetimes. It may well have been a Laimo long countline system, similar to the Mayas. The Zapotec version of eternity, only instead of marking the end of time, it marked the grace of recurrence. You picture a village elder explaining this to a child. When the 52 years are complete, everything begins again, but not quite the same. It's like stepping back into the same dream, only now you remember what happened last time. There's a tenderness in that, a kind of cultural memory encoded into the calendar itself. They didn't just remember history, they re-entered it. You'd be born on a certain day named Live Your Life, and perhaps die before that precise combination ever returned. But when it finally did, decades later, someone might whisper your name again, not in mourning, but in rhythm. One quirky theory suggests the 52-year cycle wasn't just ritual, it may have also helped regulate architecture. Temples were rebuilt on a 52-year schedule layers, added like time-lapse onions. Archaeologists have found Zapotec buildings with clearly demarcated phases, as if time dictated renovations. New calendar, round new you. Even the gods appreciated an upgrade. You pass a carved turtle with spirals for eyes. It's perched on a broken column like it knows things. The turtle was a symbol of long life. Slow time, calendar wisdom. You nod politely. It does not blink. Elsewhere, you spot a faint glyph of a bundle of reeds, tied together, another symbol tied to the completion of a cycle. Reeds grow in watery, liminal places, so of course the Zapotecs made them sacred. Reeds don't keep secrets well. They whisper when the wind turns. They rustle when time stirs. As you wander deeper into the site, you notice the architecture shifts subtly. Some corners align with stars, others with seasons, still, others with nothing at all, at least not anymore. That's the thing about cycles. They require context. Once the priests who knew which star meant fertility festival or which corner meant don't plant beans this week disappeared, the system became more mysterious than sacred. Even today, scholars are piecing it together one glyph at a time. They still argue whether the Zapotec calendar influenced their political structure. Did rulers serve 52-year terms? Were their ascensions timed with celestial resets? There are hints, but no solid answers. Just glyphs, stones, spiral-eyed turtles. The thought is oddly comforting, because in a way, the Zapotecs trusted time more than we do. They didn't fight it. They danced with it. And even when the cycle seemed to be ending, when the sky was dark and the fires went out, they waited. Because it wasn't over. It was again. You trail your fingers along a wall that feels like a spreadsheet made of stone. It's cool to the touch, a quiet ledger of centuries, and it holds one of the most charming quirks of Zapotec life, your day name. Not your nickname. Not what your friends call you when you trip on a rock. Your actual divinely timed, cosmically allocated name bestowed by the rhythm of the sacred calendar. You crouch beside a half-buried stela that's seen more sunrises than anyone you've ever met, and you imagine a newborn being wrapped in cloth, cradled in the arms of a priest, and gently named Farkerfrein, crocodile, or 12-wind, or perhaps something more unsettling like Seven Death. And everyone just nods approvingly. That's your name now. Forever. Based on the day of your birth in the 260-day sacred calendar. Unlike modern birthdays, which tend to involve cake and mild existential dread, Zapotec day naming was a whole personality. Your name meant something. 2 rain. You might be calm and nourishing. 9 jaguar fierce fast. Maybe avoid group projects. 13 dog loyal playful, possibly the class clown. It was both identity and omen. But here's the twist. There were only 260 combinations. 13 numbers paired with 20 day signs, which meant mathematically many people shared your name. Not just the same sign, but the exact combination. There was probably a whole village of 5 Dear S historians still debate how they managed the confusion. Did they add nicknames? Did they just point and hope for the best? Or maybe they embraced the ambiguity. After all, time wasn't linear, it was layered. You walk into what once may have been a naming courtyard. The shadows fall neatly into geometric shapes as the sun crests above. You can almost hear a ceremonial chant echoing faintly in the stones. A priest speaks, a name is announced, and the crowd responds not with applause but with stillness. And the Zapotecs didn't stop at day names. Your birthday determined your mom destiny. Iti, not metaphorically, literally. Certain days were good for warriors. Others were good for weavers or midwives. Some, unfortunately, were good for being sacrificed. Tough luck if you landed on one of those. But mostly, it was about reading your place in the cycle of things. You weren't born randomly. You were timed, like the stars, like corn. One stone carving nearby shows a figure, child-sized, with a sun above its head and glyphs at its feet. Scholars can't agree if this is a portrait of a named child or a symbol of the calendar itself. One fringe theory suggests these were calendrical avatars, embodied versions of day signs who performed rituals and danced through time like sacred mascots. If true, that means somewhere, sometime there might have been a real-life nine lizard strutting confidently through a temple in costume. You brush away dust from another carving. It's a small handprint deliberately etched with the number 11 above it and a strange loping animal beneath. Could it be 11? Rabbit or hand of 11 rabbit? No one knows, but it's cute. Slightly chaotic. Definitely feels like someone you'd meet at a drum circle. The day signs themselves were more than just pictograms. They were characters, some real, some mythical, some probably inspired by dreams and metaphors. Serpent, water, jaguar, house, flint. Each had its traits, moods, and dangers. Even today, in modern-day Oaxaca, echoes of these symbols survive in local customs. A crocodile day might still feel a little heavy. A flower day, a little flirtier. It's humbling, really. You start to think about how you were born on some Tuesday at 2:47 p.m., probably under fluorescent lights and a Spotify playlist. But if you'd been Zapotec, the whole sky would have been consulted. The priests would have squinted at Venus muttered over glyphs and then declared, "You are 6 monkey. Congratulations. Don't touch sharp things. Try basket weaving. Definitely avoid the full moon in August." This sacred naming system didn't just stay on paper or bark cloth more accurately. It shaped how people related to one another. Marriages were considered more or less compatible based on day names. Certain pairings were auspicious, others not so much. If you were 3 Death, you probably didn't want to date a 7 Rabbit, unless you were into chaos, in which case, power to you. Historians still try to reconstruct the logic behind these compatibilities. Some think it mirrored celestial alignments. Others believe it came down to energy types, the same kind of fuzzy astrology that tells you not to text your ex during Mercury retrograde. But for the Zapotecs, it was serious. A misaligned couple might be warned off, not by a therapist, but by a priest with a calendar and an annoyed expression. You step into a small alcove where a wall is painted with faded symbols, maybe a once bright chart of day signs, now sun-bleached and nearly gone. You close your eyes and try to guess yours. Maybe 4 reed, maybe 12 rain. Maybe you're secretly a 1 crocodile patiently waiting to wake up into your destiny. You smile. Somewhere a tiny piece of the universe once decided what to call you, and you've been echoing that syllable through time ever since. You wander into the quiet shade of what remains of a Zapotec scriptorium, or at least the ancient equivalent of one. There are no desks, no feather pens, just a flat slab of stone and the whisper of folded time. What lies here, if you squint past the dust and the centuries, is the ghost of a codex. Not a scroll, not a bound book. A screenfold manuscript long strips of deerskin or bark paper, painted in vibrant reds, blacks, and yellows, then pleated like an accordion. You kneel beside a replica, carefully preserved beneath glass, and try to imagine it in motion, fluttering open like a ceremonial fan, revealing scenes of gods, animals, numbers, and days all marching rhythmically across the page. The Zapotec codices were not just reading material. They were calendars, dream logs, ritual schedules, and maybe joke books. Well, maybe not that last one, but some glyphs do have an oddly cheeky smile. This codex in front of you likely tracked ritual events, offerings, festivals, omens the passage of Venus, and possibly who was in charge of bringing snacks to the next solstice gathering. It's hard to tell. The Zapotec writing system remains partly undeciphered. Scholars have cracked bits of it, especially the numerical parts, since dots and bars are pretty forgiving. But many glyphs remain a mystery. Historians still argue whether the script was phonetic symbolic or somewhere in between. Was it a language, a calendar, a divination tool? Yes, you imagine a priest carefully unrolling one of these codices, brushing a calloused finger across the date. Ah, yes. 3 deer on the 14th of Quetzalcoatl. That's definitely the day to bless the irrigation ditches. You're not sure what happens if you skip that ritual, but based on how intense these documents are, probably something involving frogs. There's a quirk to the codices, though. Unlike modern calendars, they're not linear. They loop, curl, bend back on themselves. Some even begin with mythological origin stories, cosmic turtles birthing mountains, gods vomiting stars, before sliding gently into bureaucratic memos about when to harvest beans. There's something delightfully human about that. One section features a long series of glyphs that may represent a dynastic record, a list of rulers and their deeds. But again, it's hard to say what counts as a deed. Built a temple, probably. Moved the solstice ceremony because it rained, maybe. Made it through a full year without being sacrificed. Definitely write that one down. You notice small red dots along the edge of one page. They seem to march like ants toward a cluster of symbols shaped like flames. Fire time, or just decorative one fringe interpretation, suggests they mark a countdown to the end of a cycle. Possibly a reminder that the universe occasionally needs to be turned off and back on again. Zapotec IT support, if you will. Next to the codex replica, a placard notes that very few original Zapotec books survived colonization. Most were destroyed by European conquerors who found the iconography concerning. Too many jaguars eating stars. Too many serpents with speech bubbles. So what remains are fragments of few lucky manuscripts and lots of educated guessing. And yet, the rhythm survives. You imagine what it would feel like to hold one of these books. It wouldn't read like a novel. It would move. You'd unfold time itself, layer by painted layer. The day signs would blink at you. The gods would whisper. The numbers would hum. It would be like holding a clock and a myth and a to-do list all at once. There's also a surprisingly elegant aesthetic to the glyphs. Bold black lines curved like vines, repeated spirals, stylized animal heads with eyes too big to ignore. Everything feels intentional, drawn with purpose. Some modern designers have borrowed these motifs without even realizing it. That little spiral on your phone wallpaper, possibly lifted from 3,000-year-old timekeeping. You glance up and see a mural reproduction of a codex scene. A priest with a jaguar pelt kneeling beneath a floating sun face presenting offerings to what looks like a large, amused hummingbird. You don't fully understand what's happening, but you kind of love it. There's a rhythm, a beat, a sense that even the birds know what day it is. That's the beauty of Zapotec timekeeping. It wasn't just functional, it was artful. They didn't separate calendar from culture. Each page of a codex carried not just dates, but emotion, a celebration, a warning, a song that could only be sung on 10 reed and not a day earlier. The fringe theorists, as always, have thoughts. Some suggest the codices were meant to be read aloud performed, that each glyph triggered a chant or a drumbeat, that the whole manuscript was one long ceremony. And honestly, that tracks. You don't paint a hummingbird that expressive just for silence. As you step away from the codex, your eyes still adjust to the feeling of color. The rest of the ruins seem muted by comparison. But you know that beneath the stone, somewhere in the shadows, more codices once fluttered. Long paper snakes slithering through time, and somewhere inside them, there was a space reserved just for your day. The sun has climbed a little higher now, soft and honey-colored as it filters through sparse clouds. You follow a winding stone path into what once served as a ceremonial plaza. It's wide, oddly silent, and feels like it remembers movement. You pause, and if you listen, really listen, you can almost hear it. The sound of bare feet, slapping softly on packed earth, rattles shaking, a chorus of deep rhythmic breaths. You've entered the world of ritual dances. Each one timed to the calendar with such eerie precision, it would make any modern event planner weep. These weren't spontaneous bursts of celebration. They were scheduled expressions of cosmic alignment. The sacred calendar didn't just track time, it choreographed it. In Zapotec tradition, certain days weren't just auspicious for ceremonies, they demanded them. And when the day signs aligned, the dancers appeared. Elaborate feathered headdresses, painted limbs, faces obscured behind clay masks shaped like animals or gods. These dancers weren't just performers, they were incarnations of time itself. You can picture it clearly. Now a figure steps into the plaza, wearing a mask shaped like a monkey, likely performing on a 3-monkey day. The monkey god was mischievous clever and a bit vain. So, of course, the dance is sprightly, teasing, a little chaotic. Then a second dancer appears slower, wrapped in jaguar skin, mimicking a stalking predator. The mood shifts. The crowd hushes. These weren't just dances, they were stories, warnings, reenactments of things that hadn't happened yet. Historians still debate whether these rituals were purely theatrical or deeply supernatural. Did the dancers believe they were channeling gods? Did the priests believe it? Or was it more symbolic, like a cosmic dress rehearsal for fate? Most scholars agree it was probably all of the above. Performance prophecy and a dash of divine bureaucracy. What's certain is that these dances were deeply calendrical. The day dictated the dance, not the other way around. Imagine trying to reschedule because of rain. Sorry, 8 Eagle falls on a Tuesday. This year, we'll have to move the ritual to next month. You'd get a lot of side eyes from the priesthood, maybe even a scolding from Venus. You wander to a corner of the plaza where shallow holes in the stone form a kind of grid. Some scholars think they were game boards. Others suspect they were markers for dancers' positions to hit as part of their timed routine, like ancient choreography dots. Stand here on 12 flint. Make offering on the 5th drumbeat. try not to trip. One fringe theory you recall involves the he dancers acting as timekeepers themselves. With every step, they counted the passage of days. With every spin, they invoked the turning of the sacred wheel. In this version, time didn't just tick forward, it danced forward, slowly, with rhythm, with breath. You pass a mural worn, cracked, but still vivid of a circle of dancers holding hands around a sunburst. Each figure has a glyph above their head. One has might one death. Another, 5 rain. A third wears no glyph, just a blank square, as if to say, this could be you. And here's the part that makes your scalp prickle. The Zapotecs likely used these ceremonies to determine fate. Not just individual fate, but communal direction. If a dancer stumbled, bad omen. If a mask cracked mid-performance, very bad omen. If the feathers didn't sway quite right in the wind, well, best postpone the war. There's a lightness to it, though. A playfulness. Some ceremonies were joyful, full of flowers, laughter, music made from turtle shells and reed flutes. Others were solemn, devoted to gods with names now lost to time. And some, if the alignment was just so, may have turned a bit grim. You sit on the edge of the plaza and feel the ancient pulse beneath you. These were not spur-of-the-moment festivities. They were obligations to the cosmos. The gods kept the sun rising and the rains coming. The people kept the dances timely and the rituals sincere. Everyone had a job, and time applauded politely from the wings keeping score. You can't help but smile imagining how that might look today. You checking your calendar. Reminder, perform jaguar dance at noon. Sharp avoid eye contact with crocodile priest. Don't mess up the drumbeat or the maze won't grow. There's something comforting about it, actually. In a world where time so often rushes forward, cold and silent, the Zapotecs responded with rhythm, with steps, with masks, with meaning. You rise again, brushing dust from your legs, and step carefully through the plaza. The shadows are longer now, stretched like dancers mid-pose. Somewhere, a breeze rustles tall grass, mimicking the soft whisper of a shaken rattle. You close your eyes, and in that moment, you are 7-flower, dancing toward the heart of the year. You step beyond the plaza into a narrower corridor of stone and shadow. The path is less ceremonial here, more administrative. You've left the dancers behind and walked straight into the bureaucratic heart of the cosmos. Yes, that's right. The Zapotec calendar didn't just keep festivals timely. It scheduled everything. You feel a chill as you realize even daily life, the planting of maize, the signing of alliances, the opening of trade routes, was quietly ruled by the skies. Time wasn't just sacred. It was practical. It was frankly a little obsessive. You duck beneath a low lintel and enter a chamber that feels like it once held meetings. You imagine men in feathered capes discussing a marriage treaty between villages. Someone pulls out a codex. It's a beautiful match, they agree. But 10 reed falls on a bad omen. We'll need to move the wedding to 13 house. Nod. Sip of cacao. Meeting adjourned. The Zapotecs were methodical in ways that would impress even the most spreadsheet-loving project manager. Their Mott civil calendar. The 365-day one was used to determine the ideal dates for crop cycles, road-building, tax collection, and possibly even war. And it wasn't random. Each segment of the year was associated with certain traits. Want to begin a journey. Wait for a favorable alignment. Want to name a leader. Better not do it under the sign of 5 death. Historians still argue whether this calendar system was enforced top-down by the priesthood or simply woven so tightly into the culture that people obeyed it without question. Either way, it worked. The skies said, "Jump," and the people asked, would that be before or after the eclipse? You pass a stone slab, carved with what looks like a calendar matrix. Rows of glyphs and dots in a grid. Maybe it's a scheduling board. Maybe it's a sacred chart. Maybe it's both. You realize that in Zapotec life, there was almost no distinction between the spiritual and the administrative. That line blurred. You didn't plant maize just because the soil was ready. You planted because the gods said the stars were aligned. And of course, Venus had something to say about everything. That glittering point of light ruled Zapotec scheduling like a cosmic middle manager with a clipboard. Certain phases of Venus were considered extremely dangerous for travel or diplomacy. Others were perfect for trade negotiations or naming a child. Priests tracked Venus's rise and fall with almost obsessive precision, and when it vanished from the sky, called superior conjunction, there were entire periods of ritual quiet. You don't send envoys when Venus is in a mood. One glyph you spot shows a star with radiating lines and a small figure bowing beneath it. The accompanying symbol may suggest wait or retreat. Scholars can't agree, but the meaning is clear. Time has spoken. Proceed carefully. It wasn't just the stars. The sun and moon too had input. You pass a series of carvings showing eclipse glyphs. These weren't moments of panic. They were pre-written events. Noted, predicted, and folded into the calendar like a holiday. Probably not one with piñatas, but still. And here's a strange, almost adorable twist. Certain animals were schedulers. 2. The call of frogs. Time to plant. The migration of butterflies. Harvest approaches. A certain bird calls twice on the night of tube lizard don't leave the house. Maybe. Hard to say. The records are vague and a little poetic. One fringe theory much debated suggests the Zapotecs might have had personalized daily planners. Perhaps codices tailored to specific households tracking their land, their ancestors, and their calendar obligations. It's speculative but charming to imagine. You can picture someone opening their morning codex over maize porridge. Ah, yes, 6 dog. A good day for repairing the roof, and maybe not offending the rain god. You stroll into what may have once been a storage chamber for ritual tools. It's empty now, but the walls are lined with pegs, where offerings or sacred bundles might have hung. Perhaps each item matched a day. A bowl for water ceremonies. A spindle for weaving festivals. A small jaguar-shaped rattle for reasons. Everything had a place, and every place had a time. What strikes you is how this obsession with timing wasn't stifling. It was reassuring. The calendar didn't restrict it, structured. You didn't have to guess. You just had to listen. The gods had already scheduled your life's appointments. Your job was to show up vaguely on time with the right mask and a reasonably clean tunic. You pass another calendar stone, this one carved with concentric rings, possibly meant to rotate. A scholar nearby once remarked that it resembled an ancient Rolodex, which is a very specific kind of nerd joke, but it fits. The Zapotecs built a system that was both spiritual and logistical. You could look at a calendar and know today is for weaving, tomorrow is for trading. And next week, that's a good time to paint the gods a new mural and remind them you're still paying attention. You exit the chamber blinking back into the sunlight. Everything feels organized. The sky above you isn't just blue, it's a giant timetable. And somewhere out there, Venus is about to send you a reminder. You smile. You're not late. You're just early for the next alignment. Your sandals tap softly on the dusty stones as you make your way toward the edge of the complex where the architecture thins and opens to wider sky. You've passed through the temples, the plazas, the codices and calendars, but now you arrive at something more subtle, yet just as monumental. Architecture designed for astronomy. Hold on. You stop in front of a squat, angled platform with a slit cut precisely through its center. It doesn't look like much, just stone and shadow, but you know better by now. This isn't a broken wall. It's a barcho, solar corridor. Either a tunnel for light, and it only works for a few minutes on a few specific days each year. Step into it. Feel the hush. The air shifts as you enter the passage. There's a slit high above positioned with pinpoint accuracy. And if you'd come on the right day, say the spring equinox, the sun would shine directly through and land in a perfect glowing oval on the back wall. Not too early, not too late. A fleeting alignment caught in the bones of a mountain. The Zapotecs didn't use telescopes. They didn't need to. They used light itself and stone that waited patiently. You step out again, blinking into brightness, and realize just how often they must have watched the skies. You might look up and think nice sunset. They looked up and thought, we're 2 days from a Venus heliacal rise. Better prepare the maize ovens. All around you, the remains of observatories are disguised as temples. Their angles aren't decorative, they're mathematical. One stepped pyramid faces slightly off from the others. Historians still argue whether this skewed orientation tracked lunar cycles, Venus phases, or solstices. Possibly all three. Possibly more. The Zapotecs didn't just build monuments to the gods. They built meeting places for the cosmos. One platform you climb has a notch carved in its upper lip. Peer through it at dawn during the winter solstice, and the sun rises directly along a mountain ridge. Not near it, not above it. Right on it. Someone figured that out with nothing but eyes patience and generations of careful marking. Probably a lot of neck strain. You wonder about the people who did this watching. Were they priests? Astronomers? Both did they keep notes? Did they pass knowledge down verbally or in glyphs? There are no clear answers. Some scholars suggest the Baal calendar knowledge was restricted, held by a ritual elite, shared in whispers and ceremony, not classrooms. And then there's Venus. Again, always Venus. The Zapotecs tracked it with near obsession. They knew its 4 distinct phases: morning star disappearance, evening star disappearance again. This 584-day cycle was mapped and revered. One ancient carving worn by centuries of wind shows a godlike figure leaping from a 5-pointed star, possibly symbolizing the rebirth of Venus in the morning sky. The timing impeccable. If Venus rose at dawn on 4 Serpent, you can bet someone had already prepared the altar the night before. There's a theory still debated that entire buildings were constructed solely to watch Venus. Not the sun, not the moon, just that one glimmering wanderer. It wasn't vanity. Venus was a calendar anchor, its appearance helping to reset the sacred count. You wonder if anyone ever forgot to check. Missed the signal, woke up late. Oh no, was today the Venus reappearance? Probably not. The Zapotecs were too coordinated for that. One stone tablet, found buried beneath a layer of rubble, bears a circular glyph many believe to represent an eclipse. Think about that. A civilization tracking the blocking of the sun, not as myth, but as prediction. They knew it was coming. They noted it in their codices, scheduled it even, like writing Solar Drama Act U1 on your cosmic calendar. You walk further to a higher terrace where the view opens fully. The entire valley stretches out below. You can see where rivers once ran, where maize once grew, where the sky pressed its breath against the land. And here, with wind tugging at your sleeves, it becomes clear. The whole city is an observatory. Monte Alban isn't just a religious center. It's a cosmic diagram. Its layout, its symmetry, its strange angles, its staggered altitudes functions as one enormous clock. The plaza catches light differently each season. The staircases throw shadows that tell the time. The buildings whisper back to the stars, and the people who lived here. They didn't gawk at the sky once a year during an eclipse and then move on. They watched, constantly, methodically. The world was speaking. The heavens were moving. And it was their job to keep up. A fringe theory you once heard insists that this obsession with sky watching wasn't just spiritual, it was survivalist. Crop failure, drought, political instability, all of it could be avoided, or at least explained, if the stars were properly understood. The sky wasn't decorative, it was data. Data written in light. You sit on the last step of the terrace watching the horizon as the sun begins to soften. Even now, you can feel the alignment. The way the wind hushes right before the light hits that one last stone. You realize with a kind of sleepy awe that you're part of this alignment too. Your breath, your heartbeat, your stillness. Because in a world built on shadow sunlight and stone, you don't just tell time. You become it. You rise slowly, like a sunbeam on the wall of an old temple, and follow the gentle slope that leads away from the observatories. Here, the architecture grows quieter. Fewer platforms, more soil. And it's here, right where civilization thins into farmland, that you stumble into something curiously moving. The agricultural calendar. It's not carved in stone. It's not painted in red on deerskin. It's planted softly in rows of maize, or caste. To the Zapotecs, maize wasn't just food. It was a calendar event with roots. It had birthdays. It had moods. You didn't just scatter seeds and hope for the best. You planted according to the sacred calendar. And if you did it wrong, well, your corn might not die, but it might sulk. And no one wants moody maize. You run your hand over the low remnants of an ancient terrace, its edges still sharp, its soil long since reclaimed by grass. This was once an agricultural stage, where farmers performed their own kind of ritual, synchronized not with clocks, but with stars, and gods, and frogs. Yes, frogs. Zapotec farmers were listening for their cow croaks, a signal that the rainy season was beginning. This wasn't superstition. It was ecosystem logic. The frogs knew before you did. They always knew. And once they started to sing, you opened the seed bundles and hoped you'd aligned everything correctly, that the priest hadn't miscounted, that the calendar hadn't hiccuped. Historians still argue whether farmers had full access to the calendar or if they waited for temple announcements. Hey, we just checked the codex. It's officially bean planting time. It's likely there was a mix of local knowledge and centralized control, as is the case with most things involving rain crops and impending famine. You come to a low wall with carvings of what at first look like animals, but you realize those are seeds. Stylized maize kernels, some whole, some sprouting, some paired with glyphs that look suspiciously like days from the sacred calendar. This may have been a planting guide. The original farmer's almanac carved in stone. Plant on 4 flower, avoid 9 wind. Definitely don't touch the squash during 12 death. It's easy to forget that for people whose lives literally depended on one plant. Timekeeping wasn't a hobby. It was insurance. It was an offering. It was a plea. And it wasn't just about when to plant. It was about what the gods were doing while you did it. Many Zapotec rituals involved offerings of maize flour or tamales to the deities, small tokens of goodwill. Here, take this steamed corn, and please don't destroy my fields with hail. Reasonable enough. One codex fragment shows a curious scene, a maize plant in the center, with what looks like 2 day signs. Rising from it, one possibly the planting day, the other the harvesting one, as if to say, this stalk has a beginning and an end. Time once again treated like a companion, or a secret ingredient. You find yourself tracing an imaginary seed's journey, planted on a sacred day, watered by stars, fed by soil that had also been timed, then harvested again on a lucky day, and maybe even ground into flour for a moth festival occurring on yet another sacred day. The calendar was everywhere. It was the menu, the schedule, the guest list, and the cookbook. Even the tools had timing. One fringe theory suggests sickles and digging sticks were sometimes marked with calendar glyphs, little reminders scratched into handles, like only use this on 7 rain. We'll never know for sure. But it fits the pattern, and if you're wondering, yes, animals were also part of the schedule. Certain days were good for breeding pigs, or leading turkeys to market. The sacred calendar didn't stop at the temple gates. It walked down into the valley, into the mud, into the stables. Even the chickens had birth charts. You pass a small hill where archaeologists once found a charred maize. Likely the remains of a ritual offering burned during a seasonal ceremony to guarantee fertility. Maize was often personified as a deity itself, and yes, it had birthdays too. A popular god named Pitao Kozobi was essentially a maize spirit with excellent hair and a strong sense of timing. You smile, imagining the humble corn cob being celebrated like royalty, placed on altars, dressed in woven cloth, possibly even sung to. Happy 8. Corn Day, little buddy. Thanks for not getting moldy this year. The further you walk, the more you realize the Zapotecs didn't just live in time, they outgrew things with it. The calendar wasn't abstract. It was physical. You could touch it, eat it, roast it. It whispered from the fields. Today is good. Today is ready. And if it wasn't, you waited, because nothing, not war, not weddings, not even weeding, was ever more important than getting the timing just right. Your path dips gently into a shaded grove, the air cooler, thick with the scent of wet stone and moss. You've wandered beyond the terraces, past the observatories, and into a quieter, more delicate zone where the calendar didn't just track time, but once had to correct it for a cure. Because yes, even in a civilization this precise, with sacred frogs and sun-aligned temples sometimes, things didn't line up. And so came that one moment when the priests looked at the sky, looked at the harvest, looked back at their codices, and said, essentially, oh, you're here to witness a yanan or breed calendar recalibration. The Zapotecs, like other Mesoamerican cultures, understood that their calendar, especially the 365-day civil one, was ever so slightly off from the solar year, by about a quarter of a day, which, as you may know, adds up, slowly, quietly, like a maze god sneaking off schedule. Now, we don't know exactly how the Zapotecs handled it. They didn't seem to use leap days like we do, but there are hints, strange patterns in the inscription's glyphs that seem skipped or added even a few codices where the year count resets oddly. Historians still argue whether they adjusted in small, quiet increments or if they staged entire ritual overhauls. When things started to drift, you sit on a broken step, where a now eroded stela once stood, possibly marking one such moment. You imagine the conversation between two high priests. Is the solstice early this year? Depends. Did you remember to subtract the fire days? I thought you did that. And so the universe nearly collapses due to a missed math check. But instead of panic, the Zapotec response was likely ceremonial. If your calendar misaligned with the cosmos, you didn't crumple it up. You sang to it. You recalibrated with reverence. Rituals. There are faint glyphs that might represent rebinding time, offering days to the gods, skipping others, smoothing over the seams like patching a woven mat. One theory suggests that certain festivals, especially those held at equinoxes or solstices, served as cosmic checkpoints. If the light fell, even a little wrong in the temple corridor, the priests knew. Not just in theory, visibly. They would recalibrate the year using real-time astronomy. No calculators, just shadows and well-timed feathers. You wander into a circular enclosure, once a sacred calendar court. Some believe these were spaces not just for ceremony, but for calculating corrections. Imagine a giant human-sized calendar wheel, where you step on 13 monkey and see where it lands against 5 rabbit. When the gears don't align, you know it's time for an adjustment. It sounds wildly complicated, and it was. But here's the twist: the Zapotecs embraced the complexity. Their calendar wasn't brittle. It was flexible by design, like a loom with floating threads tight enough to hold the pattern loose enough to be rewoven. One inscription from a highland site shows an entire block of days seemingly marked void. No ceremonies, no glyphs, just a space. Some think it represents a skipped period, an intercalary pause to realign the count. Others believe it was symbolic silence, a moment to let the universe catch its breath. Imagine that. Your entire society stops for a week because the stars need a minute. Fringe theorists, of course, go further. Some suggest that on rare occasions, the Zapotec calendar wasn't just corrected, it was rebooted. Full reset. New count. Fresh names. Maybe even a new interpretation of the cosmos. Every glyph repainted. Every ritual rescheduled. Like switching operating systems mid-harvest. Is there hard evidence for that? Not exactly. But there are gaps. Odd overlaps in ruler successions. Festivals that vanish from the record only to reappear later under different names. It's tantalizing, confusing, very on brand for the ancient timekeepers. You pause beside a crumbled altar where maize husks were once burned to mark seasonal shifts. You wonder, did anyone resist the change? Were there Zapotec calendar conservatives grumbling? Back in my cycle, the equinox was on 10. Flint, and we liked it that way. Probably, but most would have accepted the adjustment because they trusted the system. It wasn't about the day on paper. It was about the sky. If the sun says you're off track, then you are. And the only logical response is to realign your entire worldview. You take one last look at the circle of stones, feeling the weight of their quiet corrections. They never shouted, they never blamed, they just adjusted. And that's the lesson, really. Even the tidiest calendar, the most sacred one, can fall out of step. But if you're listening and watching and willing to shift, time will welcome you back. You step carefully between two jagged stones and find yourself in the shadows of a small courtyard. No murals here, no elaborate glyphs, just a flat expanse of dust-broken potsherds. And wait, is that a pile of pebbles and bones? It is. This is where the calendar was born, from counting, not carving, from bone chips and small stones arranged in neat rows by careful hands. You're looking at the earliest kind of calculator, a place value counting system, built with materials you could find under your bed if you lived in 500 BCE, and your bed was a reed mat on dirt. The Zapotecs, like their neighbors, counted at base 20. A vigesimal system. Why 20 fingers and toes? Naturally, it's delightfully human. You probably would have done the same if you had to keep track of ceremonial days and your own limbs at the same time. You kneel beside a recreated counting board, 20 slots marked by scratches in the stone, some holding little black seeds or round pebbles. A dot equals 1. A bar equals 5. Stack them, combine them, and suddenly you're not just marking 3 bananas, you're plotting Siwa, a solar event. So, with mathematical elegance, historians still argue whether the Zapotecs invented this method independently or borrowed it from the Olmecs or early Maya. But what's certain is this: they didn't just count to 20. They counted to 260 I, 2 3365, 2 18980 QF, and they did it over and over again without losing their place or their patience. There's a small pile of jawbones nearby, goat, maybe deer. These weren't leftovers from a snack. These were tally bones, some notched, some colored. It's likely that priests or calendar keepers used them to track lunar cycles, sacred days, or the number of rituals completed in a particular cycle. You pick one up and feel the grooves under your fingers. This wasn't decorative. It was functional. It was early data science with teeth. You walk to a wall painted with a grid of symbols and begin to see it differently now, not as art, but as a giant analog calendar app, with each glyph marked off by someone using a pebble or a shell, moving it down one day at a time like an ancient desk toy. And that's when it hits you. Time wasn't just passing. It was being searched, measured, almailered, and someone was always counting. You look up and imagine the moment when the priest realized he'd counted all the way around. The sacred 260-day calendar back at Worst Crocodile again after nearly 9 months of careful tracking. What did he do? Ring a bell? Throw a party? Or just move the stone back to the beginning and start again? There's a quirky theory, very fringe, that the Zapotecs used cicada shells as counters. They're light, they make a sound, and they're naturally numbered thanks to the segments in their legs. There's no hard evidence, but the image is irresistible, a row of priests clicking beetle shells together to chart the motions of Venus. One tablet shows a priest holding a staff topped with a glyph and 3 small circles. It might be a record of an offering, or a tally, or maybe a ritual receipt. Sacrifice 2 birds, 1 bundle of maize. Please see attached obsidian blade for proof of ritual. You can't help but laugh softly. Even here, in a world so ancient, it predates Roman sandals, the need to keep track of things is universal. Another theory suggests the Zapotecs had memory aids. Not written documents, but string and bead systems, like early versions of the Andean quipu. Colored threads knotted at different intervals. If true, that means some priest once stood in this very courtyard rubbing a line of string between his fingers, whispering, "Okay, 3, win then 4. Jaguar? No. Wait, we already offered the beans that day." This wasn't primitive record keeping. It was interactive time management. Everything had a place. Every count mattered. Even a few lost pebbles could throw off the ritual timing for a month, which is probably why these spaces were so sacred. You weren't just counting numbers. You were maintaining cosmic alignment. You find a broken shard of pottery near a low bench. It has a single line scratched into it, faint, almost accidental. But beside it are 3 dots. Maybe it's graffiti. Maybe it's a tally. Maybe it's someone's version of only 2 days left till Venus reappears. You lean back and think about all the things we now trust to algorithms. Our reminders, our appointments, our calendars buzzing in our pockets. And yet, here thousands of years ago, someone did the same job with pebbles bones and celestial certainty. And let's be honest, they probably missed fewer appointments. You follow a quiet path away from the counting courtyard, your mind still spinning with pebbles and dot bars when the wind shifts. A scent, wood smoke, and something sweet curls through the air. It draws you toward another ceremonial platform, this one different from the others. It feels attended, watched, like someone or something is keeping schedule. You step slowly into a plaza lined with statues. Not towering, not fearsome, just quietly present. You count them 5, maybe 7. You lose track because each one has a face carved into stone that feels oddly familiar. Human, but not quite. And it hits you. These are gods on a timetable. The Zapotec pantheon wasn't vast like some others, but it was precise. Their deities didn't just symbolize wind or corn or death. They had roles, shifts, dates, like celestial employees with very specific working hours. And what governed those hours? The calendar. You approach one figure, partially eroded, but clearly a deity of fertility, maybe Pitao Kozobi. Again, the maize god, who made a cameo back in the agricultural fields. His face is round, content ears, decorated with carved maize kernels. He doesn't look terrifying. He looks punctual. Each major god in the Zapotec world had calendar days. They were tied to days when they were strong, receptive, or especially active. And on those days, people gathered here. Offerings were made, dances performed. Sometimes blood was spilled, but not just because someone felt like it, because it was on the calendar. You look down at your feet and notice a carving in the shape of an open hand. just one. A signal, maybe. Today's the day. Some scholars believe that entire ritual schedules were arranged like divine office hours. Want to make an offering to the rain? God great, he's accepting prayers next on 5 flower. Need to consult the death god? You'd better book that early. His next appearance is 3 cycles away. There's a playful fringe theory that the Zapotecs even had a kind of divine calendar grid, matching gods to certain years in larger cycles. One deity might be dominant during rabbit years, another during house years. It's hard to confirm. The glyphs are elusive, but imagine how that changes things. You're not just born under a sacred sign, you're born under a deity's jurisdiction. Oh, you were born in a crocodile year under 7 death. That explains so much. You wander to another statue, this one more angular. Sharp teeth, feline features, eyes wide and unblinking. Jaguar deity most likely. Associated with the underworld, with night, with sacred strength. Probably not someone you wanted to disappoint. And yet, there's a date etched faintly at the base of the stone. Not a name. A day sign. Maybe the day this god arrived, or departed, or took your cousin. That's what makes it so eerie. The gods didn't float above time. They were subject to it. Ruled by it. Just like the people. Just like the fields. Even celestial beings had to respect the Zapotec calendar. You picture a high priest glancing nervously at the codex one morning, noticing that today is one death, the day of a certain god's return. Everyone straightens their cloaks. The drums begin. The plaza fills. It's showtime. You do not make a god wait. And yet, there's reverence here, not fear. You walk past an altar where burned copal once wafted toward the sky. The scent still lingers in the stone. Offerings weren't just payment, they were appointments. Rituals weren't just ceremony, they were meetings. Scheduled, recurring, non-negotiable. One stone shows 2 figures bowing to each other. One wears feathers, the other wears stars. It might be a priest and a god, or a personified calendar, or, as one wild interpretation suggests, a deity thanking humanity for keeping time properly. Thanks for not forgetting my feast day, guys. That was a close one. Historians still debate how deeply the average person understood this divine scheduling. Was it common knowledge? Was it passed down in families? Or was it gate-kept by the priesthood, carefully dispensed like cosmic consulting advice? The evidence is thin. But the consistency of offerings, the alignment of temples, and the endless repetition of calendar signs suggest this wasn't a secret. It was a way of life. You take a seat on a cool stone step and look out across the plaza. It's empty now, just you and the statues. But you can feel it, the hum of time as ritual. The comfort of knowing that the gods didn't appear at random, they showed up when scheduled, just like the sun, just like Venus, just like you walking this path exactly as the day intended. And somewhere quietly watching from the shadows, the gods nod once, right on time. You take a deep breath and exhale slowly, feeling the weight of time settle on your shoulders like a woven shawl. The gods have come and gone, their days ticked off like ceremonial reminders. And now, as you turn into a smaller, more worn path at the edge of the ruins, you're drawn into a whisper of a mystery that even the best stone carvers couldn't explain. It's about zero key, or rather, did the Zapotecs invent it? You've probably heard this question posed about the Maya. and they do indeed get much of the credit. But the Zapotecs were around earlier, and tucked away in a few cracked stelae and carved glyphs is the ghost of a symbol, a shell-like image, a spiral, a little hollow dot that might represent nothing. Or more accurately, a placeholder for time not yet arrived. You step up to a partially buried glyph stone in a shaded alcove. There it is. Faint, almost lost a dot inside a shallow oval. It's not labeled. It never says 0, but it's in a place where a number should be, and the number isn't there. And now you're thinking, this isn't absence. This is intention. Historians still argue whether this was a true 0, a mathematical concept, or a symbolic pause, a marker for a cycle's beginning. But here's what matters. They made room for nothing. The Zapotecs carved space for a moment before counting began. For silence. For potential. You crouch beside a glyph that shows what looks like a calendar wheel. Its beginning marked not by 1 crocodile or 13 death, but by a symbol scholars refer to as a null glyph. It may have been used to mark withBoring, the end of one cycle and the start of another on Inquirer. A hinge, not a number. Still, it's hard to look at it and not feel the stirrings of the concept of 0. And it's not just here. Across Mesoamerica, these shell-like glyphs appear in calendars, codices, and astronomical records. Most famously in the Maya long count, which uses base 20 numbers stacked in vertical sequences. And at the bottom of each stack, often a 0. So why don't we know for sure if the Zapotecs beat them to it? Because no one wrote first in stone. Cultures didn't leave footnotes. Ideas evolved together, sometimes in parallel, sometimes converging like vines growing toward the same sun. Maybe the Maya formalized it. Maybe the Zapotecs whispered it first. Maybe it came from a shared root culture, the Olmecs, or even something older, still buried beneath layers of jungle and time. But here on this stone, you feel it. The hush before counting. The deep breath before the calendar begins. There's a theory, half whimsical, half serious, that the Zapotec calendar priests needed 0. For one reason, ritual prep. You can't have day 1 of the ceremony without a day to prepare. So they inserted a silent day, a nothing, not to be celebrated, not to be counted, just to get things ready. It was sacred absence, a divine loading screen. Fringe thinkers proposed that 0 wasn't just mathematical, it was philosophical, I'm sure. That the Zapotecs saw time as something that didn't begin with presence, but with possibility. You weren't born into the calendar fully formed. You were shaped in the pause before your day name. You like that idea. A soft beginning. A hush before the song. You walk past another glyph, where a god sits calmly inside a circle, with nothing written around him. Some believe this represents the god before creation. Others think it's symbolic of eternal pause, a cosmic timeout. But maybe it's just 0. Waiting. The implications ripple outward. If the Zapotecs understood 0 not just as nothing, but as a number with value, then they grasped something fundamental about time, that absence matters, that a gap in a calendar isn't an error, it's an invitation. You think about our modern obsession with filling every moment, every second tracked, every blank space filled with noise. But here, the Zapotecs gave us a gift we rarely accept. The right to stop. A glyph with no number, a day with no rituals, a space in the cycle where you wait and trust the count will continue. You reach a narrow bench-like stone, still warm from the sun. You sit, and beside you is a small carving, a single hollow oval, not a star, not a number, just a quiet suggestion that today might not be something yet. And that's okay, because even the most meticulous, elegant calendar in the ancient world made room for stillness. You're walking slower now. The stone beneath your feet feels older, smoother, worn thin by centuries of soft sandals and sun-chasing footsteps. Ahead of you, the valley spreads wide and pale gold in the fading afternoon light. The edges of things blur, little shapes of temples, softened glyphs, go quiet, and the great tick of the calendar seems to ease into a gentle hum. You're nearing the end of the cycle, not just in the narrative sense, but in the Zapotec one, where cycles never ended exactly. They just folded inward, curled like a codex closing. Time didn't stop. It recurred, softly, precisely, with almost unbearable tenderness. You climb one last staircase, stones, chipped, moss-touched, and reach a circular platform. It may have once held a ceremonial fire or an altar. Now it just holds light and silence. You sit in the middle and let it all wash over you. The Zapotec calendar was a machine of eternity. Not because it promised infinite time, but because it understood how to repeat meaningfully. Every day had been lived before. Every glyph was familiar, and yet each cycle brought something new. Every one crocodile came with fresh breath. Every 9 wind brought a new breeze. You think back to everything you've walked through, the dual calendars, clicking together like interlocking gears. The calendar round, rotating through generations. The dances timed to constellations. The gods that clocked in and out like ancient employees. The pebbles, the maze, the bones, the frogs, the zeros. Time didn't just move forward here. It spiraled. See, Kari, historians still debate what happened when the Zapotec calendar reached its grand reset, the completion of a full 52-year calendar round. Was there a festival, a prayer, a full reconsecration of the city's temples, or something smaller, a relighting of hearth fires, a whisper shared between elders, a nod toward the stars that had stayed faithful? Maybe all of that. Maybe none. The stones don't give a definite answer, but they suggest continuity, the kind that doesn't demand spectacle, just presence. You lay back now, arms spread across warm stone. The sky overhead deepens to that soft cobalt blue that comes just before dusk. You imagine a Zapotec timekeeper lying in this very spot centuries ago, counting stars instead of steps. There's a finality in this silence, but also a softness. The sense that this is exactly what the calendar was for. Not just tracking ceremonies or crop rotations or eclipses, but arriving at this moment of Horichao, Waites more chi, offers like quiet repetition. Time has returned. The count is ready to begin again. So here you are, lying still, wrapped not in blankets, but in the gentle hum of a civilization that understood time better than most of us ever will. Above you, the stars blink into being right on schedule. The same stars the Zapotecs watched. The same ones they named, charted, folded into calendars not for control, but for communion. You don't need to remember every date or deity. You don't need to decode every glyph. What matters is the rhythm, the breath, the spiral of things repeating familiar but never identical. Like footsteps through a field that's been walked for generations, each imprint new, but shaped by those that came before. Let your thoughts soften now. Picture the calendar wheels turning slowly in the dark, not with urgency, but with grace. A stone corridor awaiting a sliver of light, a priest marking a pebble, a god waiting patiently for their appointed hour. There is no rush, no alarm, just time unfolding like a codex page by page again and again. You're part of it now. Your breath joins the cycle. Your heartbeat echoes the ancient count. Let it all fade. The sacred names, the feathered masks, the maze gods, the long shadows on solstice steps. Let what remains be simple. Stillness. Return. The calendar resets. You are safe. You are right on time.